Lesson number 4. Oftentimes you will hear this one reversed in the modern world. You oftentimes hear this saying, sell the sizzle, not the steak. But the truth is, the lesson goes the other way too. Remember, I mentioned every single Zippo from the first one sold in the early 1930s all the way up until a new Zippo lighter sold today have come with one very clear, dependable guarantee. If this lighter stops working, if you're not able to make fire from it, you send it back to Zippo and they fix it for free. Postage paid, all repairs made. You will always have a working lighter because what you bought isn't the lighter. What you really bought was the experience. Right? Zippo doesn't sell lighters. They sell the experience of fire. And if the lighter ever fails to give you that experience, they're going to fix it so that you get the experience. Consider that. Consider that that's one of the reasons why Zippo has been able to establish themselves as such a successful and worldwide iconic brand because they're selling the experience, not the product. The product, the lighter itself, is just a vehicle for the user experience they're trying to sell. Another great example of this from relatively recent technology history is the story of the Apple iPod versus the Microsoft Zoom. And if you ever looked at both of these products on paper, these were both portable MP3 players that were being sold around the beginning of the century. On paper, the Microsoft Zoom was clearly a superior product. The specs on the Zoom were much better than the specs on Apple's iPod. And if you were just looking at the specs on paper, you might actually question why anybody in the world would go out and buy Apple's product relative to Microsoft's product. In fact, many users who had a chance to test drive both products hands-on agreed with this and said that the Microsoft Zune was a superior product. Tech reviewers, authors, commentators, and collaborators in the consumer technology space, many of them agreed that Microsoft had made a superior product. But I bet many of you watching this right now have heard of the Apple iPod. I bet very few of you have heard of or remember the Microsoft Zoom. Microsoft lost, and they lost big time. Why did they lose? Well, they lost because they were selling a product. They were selling a music player. That's it. Apple had a much grander vision. Apple wanted to sell you the experience of listening to music. And their device, their product, the iPod, was just a gateway into that experience. Shortly after the iPod launched, what service did Apple launch? iTunes. That way you could go to Apple, not just to get to the device to play music, but to get the music itself. This was something Microsoft never got. If you're looking for a really good deep dive into this idea of sell the steak, not the sizzle, right? Sell the experience, not the product. You might want to listen to Simon Sinek. He's got a great talk that I've got linked on this slide called The Finite and Infinite Games of Leadership. And in this talk, he presents two different approaches, an infinite game and a finite game. And he talks about how if infinite game players are ever matched up against finite game players, the players playing an infinite game will always win. It's a fascinating topic that dives a lot deeper into the reasons why some companies are able to sell every single product they come up with and others struggle. If you listen to his talk, one of the things you'll hear Simon Sinek talk about in the finite and infinite games of leadership is Apple and Dell. Dell years ago tried to sell flat screen televisions. This is arguably right in their wheelhouse. A company that sells flat screen monitors and computers and laptops should have no problem selling flat screen TVs. But nobody wanted to buy Dell's flat screen TVs because everybody thinks of Dell as the computer company. Meanwhile, in 2007, Apple launches the iPhone. Everybody wanted to have an iPhone. Nobody looked at Apple and said, that's the computer company, that's the music device company. Because Apple, the brand, was already associated in their consumers' minds with selling experiences, not products. How does this apply to blockchain? Well, if the entire value proposition of your idea or your product or your service or your offering depends on the word blockchain, in other words, if there's no way for you to describe the value of what you're doing without mentioning the technology that's involved, you're probably getting this wrong. Remember, the technology should just be the vehicle or the gateway to a larger experience. So forget about blockchain for a minute. What's the experience that you're selling? Let's think about Web 2.0 and social media. Think about a platform like Facebook. If Facebook is trying to encourage you to sign up for their service and become a new user, do they brag about the technology that they use? Do they talk about why Facebook is a great platform because it's built on top of TCP/IP networks? And TCP/IP networking and packet routing is clearly the best mechanism for disseminating messages across globally decentralized massive networks? No, Facebook doesn't talk about any of that stuff. Facebook sells you on the experience. Wouldn't it be nice to reconnect with all your high school friends and see what they're doing? Wouldn't it be nice to track down that friend that you had in childhood that you lost contact with? Wouldn't it be nice to know more about what was going on in your neighborhoods and the community around you? These are the reasons that Facebook uses to try and talk you into signing up for their service. The technology is largely irrelevant in that conversation and can be properly viewed as nothing more than a means or an end or a gateway to that larger user experience. So again, if the whole value proposition of what you want to do depends entirely on the technology, blockchain or otherwise, you're probably approaching this a bit more like Microsoft with the Zoom than you are like Apple with the iPod. Another way to think about this is if you had a time machine and you could go forward or backward in time 100 years, does your idea still make sense? Let's think again about the Microsoft Zune and the Apple iPod. Microsoft was selling you a product, a music player. If I went 100 years forward in time, that Zune wouldn't make any sense. It would be outdated. It would be ancient technology. If I went back in time 100 years, that Zune would be useless. I wouldn't have anywhere to download music from. I wouldn't have any chargers that I could plug it into and charge it up. Headphones wouldn't have been invented yet that I could plug into my device and listen to it. So Microsoft's value proposition, a product, loses a lot of its relevance if you go forward or back in time. How about Apple? Remember, Apple wasn't selling you a product. Apple was selling you the experience of listening to music. People in 100 years are going to enjoy listening to music every bit as much as they do today. And people from centuries past enjoyed and loved and craved music every bit as much as we do today. The value proposition that Apple was making was timeless. And the one that Microsoft was making was extremely time bound. You don't even have to have watched Simon Sinek's presentation to guess who is the infinite player and who is the finite player in that particular game. Lesson number 5. There's a lot more that goes into making a good solution. And one critical component to success is your culture. And guess what? Good culture, good organization, or corporate culture, it's not an accident. Good culture is cultured. There's a reason we use that word. Zippo has a very, very unique culture. They have a culture that's about more than just making lighters. When they wake up every day and go to work, they realize that their mission is not just to go to the factory and to crank out as many of these as humanly possible. They realize that they're focused on something bigger. They realize that they have this deeply personal connection to their customers and to the product that they make. They have a deep and profound gratitude to the town of Bradford, Pennsylvania, the town that they've always operated in. There were times when the company wasn't profitable, but the company meant so much to the local economy of Bradford, Pennsylvania, that the government stepped in and helped Zippo operate and continue to hire employees and keep them employed, even when the company wasn't turning a profit. And this has gone the other way too. As more and more manufacturing jobs have left the United States and been shipped overseas, Bradford, Pennsylvania is one of the few industrial era towns that is still healthy and vibrant. The town helped support Zippo, and Zippo helped supported the town. They realized that their business was about more than just manufacturing a product. It was about finding a place and a home in their community and the larger world around them. And a big part of the corporate culture at Zippo is quality, having a deep and unnegotiable commitment to the quality of the products that they sell their customers. If you decide to take a tour of the Zippo factory in Bradford, Pennsylvania, one of the highlights is the tour of customer service. And in the tour of customer service, this on-site customer service museum that Zippo maintains, you can see some of the lighters that have been sent back for repair. Even lighters that have been intentionally destroyed by their owners, so Zippo would send them a new working one. Zippo is not only happy to do that, they brag about that. They brag about the fact that they have the best customer service imaginable because they're like Apple. They're not selling you a product, they're selling you an experience. And good customer service is part of that experience. Other than Zippo, can you think of any organization in the world today that has their own dedicated museum of customer service? Yeah, I can't either. What does this have to do with blockchain? Well, remember, we're trying to sell an experience, not a product. We're trying to sell a bigger vision. So think bigger than just blockchain and the technology that you're using to go create and deliver great solutions. Think about things like, what do you want your organization to be about? What are the things that are important to you? What are the things that don't matter? What are the things that are non-negotiable? Right? Zippo's non-negotiable item is, if the lighter breaks, we fix it for free. It doesn't matter if it breaks because you accidentally dropped it or it breaks because you intentionally destroyed it. The guarantee is the guarantee. No ifs, ands, or buts. It is non-negotiable. What do you want to be known for? What do you want your legacy to be? Do you want people to look back in 100 years' time and remember you because you built one great solution? Do you want to be Microsoft trying to be remembered for the Zune, or would you rather be Apple, who will always be remembered as the company that improved the experience of consuming music? And maybe most importantly, who or what are you grateful for or thankful for? Zippo has always been very grateful for the support that the local community, that the town of Bradford has given them. And that gratitude has been repaid to the town many times, such that the company and the town now have an inextricably beneficial relationship with each other. What are the things you want to pour your personal and your organization's gratitude into? And how does that help you drive and define a larger mission? Here's something to think about. Look at the sentence on the bottom of my slide. Whenever someone mentions blank, I want them to think of us. What do you want that blank to be? The answer to that question is about a lot more than platforms or tools or feature sets or ones and zeros, or the fact that Ethereum can do this, but Hyperledger can do that, but Corda can do this other thing. These are much bigger questions, questions that are more difficult to answer, but questions that, in my mind, are very important to answer before we start diving in and trying to solution with blockchain. Lesson number 6. Remember lesson number 5? Remember all that culture stuff? Yeah, that's what your customers are really buying. And Zippo does a great job showing this. They have transcended their original market many times over. The primary customer of Zippo lighters when they first started business were cigarette smokers, cigarette and cigar smokers. Cigarette smoking in particular has taken an incredible nosedive. There were far more smokers back in the 1930s than there are in the 2020s. But today, Zippo is selling more lighters than they ever have before. On the surface, that doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. How is your primary customer base shrinking, but your sales volume continues to increase? To put this in perspective, Zippo manufactures over 32,000 lighters every single day. And a big part of this is because Zippos have become collectible. Remember, I mentioned back in 1958, for quality control purposes, they started date stamping every lighter. Like I said, this was originally done for quality control purposes. So if there was a bad batch or something went wrong, we could make that recall easier. It would be easier to identify affected models. This inadvertently had the effect of making these collectible. And today, 1 in every 4 Zippo customers is considered a collector. This is amazing. A collector is defined as someone who owns 12 or more Zippo lighters. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine if your customers were so passionate about your product and so committed to your company as a brand that 25% of your customer base own 12 or more of your products? Can you imagine if an automaker had that kind of loyalty? Can you imagine if 1 out of every 4 customers of Ford Motor Company had 12 or more Ford cars and trucks at home? That's an incredible thing to think about. Zippo lighters show up in museums all around the world, particularly in war museums. Zippo's biggest competitor is the well-known ubiquitous Bic plastic lighter. But have you ever seen a Bic lighter in a museum? Have you ever seen a collectible Bic lighter get auctioned off for hundreds or thousands of dollars? I haven't either. And again, back to Simon Sinek's point, if you watch his incredible video about the finite and infinite games of leadership, he talks about Dell trying to sell flat screen TVs while Apple has no problem selling any product they come up with. As soon as Apple announces a new product, people line up around the block to buy it. And that's how Apple is successfully transitioned from a company that made desktop computers to portable music players to headphones to smartphones to TVs. And now rumor has it, they may even enter into the automotive market and start selling self-driving cars. How come Apple has not been pigeonholed as a company and people are willing to try any product they make, even if it's radically different from all of their other offerings? But Dell turns around and tries to do something that is still smack dab in the middle of their wheelhouse. They're just trying to move from selling flat screen monitors to selling flat screen televisions. But nobody wants the Dell TV because Dell's the computer company. Well, again, it's because one of those companies is selling you an experience and the other is selling a product. Remember that whatever your product or service offering is, what it really is just an offering or a gateway to what you want that larger experience to be. And your product, your solution, your offering is a vehicle for you to share and express and engage and enlarge that culture. A lot of people, when they approach some of these technical solutions, especially in the blockchain space, are thinking all about the ones and the zeros and the technical considerations and not thinking about that grander vision, about the culture, about the emotional connection that your customers want to form to your product, to your brand, to your company. You just need to give them the way to do it because this is what they're really buying. Right? Not many people talk about this sort of thing in their solution white papers. But just because you don't see most people talking about it doesn't mean it doesn't matter. And think about Zippo. If you do this right, if you do a good job at this, if you really get people to buy into this larger vision and this experience you're selling, if you set up your products and your solutions not as ends in and of themselves, but as means to something greater and larger, then what you'll find is even after your product becomes irrelevant, your customers will invent new uses for it. Think about Zippo. Their primary customers a century ago were cigarette smokers. There are not nearly as many cigarette smokers in the world as there were 100 years ago, but Zippo is selling more lighters than ever. Why? Because their customers believe so much in that product and that brand that when the original intent of the product stopped being relevant, the customers took it upon themselves to invent new uses and new sources of value for that product. Stop and let that sink in for a moment. Wouldn't you love to have a customer or user base that is so fiercely loyal and dedicated to you that they will look for reasons to keep your product or your service relevant even after its original use case is sunsetted? I bet any of us would kill for that. Speaking of the customer experience, another great lesson we can learn from Zippo is if you focus on that customer experience, good things will happen along the way, even if you don't intend them to. Right? Like I said, in 1958, Zippo decided to start putting a date stamp on the bottom of every case of every lighter that they sold. They did this purely for quality control purposes. They wanted to make sure if there were ever any defects or manufacturing errors, they could identify the affected lighters easily and get them recalled, get them fixed. Because remember, it's not the lighter that's important, it's the experience of fire. That's what Zippo is really selling. This inadvertently made Zippos collectible. Now that there's this year stamp on the bottom, people start wanting to collect them. So you can have the lighter that was made the year that you got out of school, or you got married, or your first child was born, or whatever significant event in time you want to memorialize. So Zippo started off doing something that was just intended to make the customer experience better. They weren't focused on making their lighters collectibles. And you could argue that if their primary focus was to turn their lighters into collectibles, they would have failed. But by focusing on something else, by just trying to make this the best customer experience possible, inadvertent good luck came their way. And today, slightly over 25% or 1 in 4 of their customers is a collector and owns 12 or more of their products. This was an accident. You will never find this on any business plan that Zippo ever wrote or enacted. They didn't set out for this as the goal. They were focused completely on how do we make a better customer experience. And you'll find if you do the same thing in blockchain, if you focus all your efforts on making the best customer experience possible, fate and the universe has an odd way of rewarding you. And very often you'll find that the benefits that are conferred upon you for creating the best customer experience possible are tremendous and profound and much bigger and more meaningful than anything you'd planned. And if you'd set out to try and do that big meaningful thing right from the beginning, you probably would have got it wrong. you're probably better off just focusing on continually improving that customer experience. Remember, depending on the archaeological records you subscribe to, human beings mastering fire is something that happened anywhere between 400,000 and 1 million years ago. So a process that is 500,000 years or older is still ripe for improvement. Don't forget that. And make sure you're really focusing your efforts on something that is going to make that customer or end user experience demonstrably different and demonstrably better. Lesson number 8, don't reinvent. This can kind of be a tough one to lose sight of when we're working with something as new and radical and sweeping as blockchain. Right? It's easy to look at these radically new technologies, these brand new paradigms that get introduced into the world because of the introduction of these new technologies, and to think, all right, we need to go destroy everything in the world around us and rebuild from scratch using these new tools. But reinvention oftentimes doesn't confer the greatest benefits. Right? Zippo didn't set out to reinvent fire. They knew that fire still worked and provided value. Most of their design was already in place. Again, George Blaisdell's biggest innovation was simply adding one hinge to an already existing design so that the lid didn't pull straight off, it opened on a hinge. That's not a significant reinvention. And most of the design of that Zippo lighter was already in place from day one. Every design decision that George made when he designed the Zippo lighter had a clear and direct link to a better user experience. Adding that hinge, even though it wasn't complex or earth shattering in terms of complexity, had a very, very clear user benefit. Now you can have fire with just one hand, not two. In other words, the amount of input or design work or remanufacturing or redesign that went into all of this was minimal, but the effect was huge. Oftentimes in the technology world, we think the effort and the result have to scale up linearly, or that it's impossible for them to have any kind of inverse relationship. There were many search engines in the early days of the internet which offered features and functions that went well beyond Google. Search engines like Lycos, Alta Vista, Ask Jeeves, and more did things that today Google doesn't offer. Yet Google has become the gold standard for internet search engines. Why? Because they understood this principle. They understood that sometimes doing the least and minimizing the amount of design and complexity often results in the greatest reward. Remember, the market will reward you for being clever, not for being smart, which is confusing because if you're successful, people will remember you for being smart, not for being clever. What does all of this have to do with blockchain? Well, remember, re-engineering solutions like this can be fun. It can be glamorous. It can be a great way to show off to other engineers or technical resources that you know more minutia and trivia than they do. It can be very satisfying for one's own ego or self-image, but rarely does this approach result in wide and sustained market success. It can be a fun, glamorous activity, but rarely is it all that productive or successful. So ask yourself, as you're exploring the world of blockchain, what do you see in the world that already works, that provides value, that does what it's supposed to do, but might be carrying artifacts from an unnecessary artifacts from a previous time or era? Right? That was George's big light bulb moment. Fire had always been a two-handed process, from rubbing sticks together to stone and flint to match and striker, all the way up to Austrian trench lighter. And George realized the fact that fire is two-handed is no longer a requirement. It's an artifact that we've carried with us from an earlier time. And by adding one simple hinge to my design, I can do away with the need for this to be a two-handed process. I can subtract. I don't need that artifact in my design anymore. Um, one helpful exercise, if you've got a few different use case ideas or ways that you might want to apply blockchain or other technologies, one way that can be really helpful to clarify your thinking is simply to create a scorecard. Create a scorecard. You can easily do this on a spreadsheet or a notebook by hand. Um, Create a scorecard and write down all of your ideas, and then go back for each idea. And on a relative 1 to 10 scale, rate the impact that you believe each effort will have on the customer experience. From 1, which means it will have no impact on the customer experience, my customers won't be able to tell the difference, to 10, to where my customers go, oh my God, how did I ever live life without this? I can't imagine ever going back to the world before I knew about your product or your service or your offering. Create an idea index. This is simply where we take whatever that impact is to the customer experience, whatever that 1 to 10 rating was above, and we divide it by another 1 to 10 rating. The amount of effort required to implement your solution. And what we're looking for is any ideas that have a score greater than 1. Anything less than 1 still needs a lot of work. And so we're just going to ignore it. But anything with a score greater than 1, anything that by definition results in a greater user experience relative to the work we put into it than the work we put into it, is a good idea. In other words, if we get more return from our work than work invested to get the return, that sounds like a great idea, and it's worthy of further consideration. So make this very, very simple scorecard for all your ideas. Rank those ideas from the highest score to the lowest. Anything that's 1 or below, toss it off the list. And everything you have left that scores a 2 or above, take a look at those ideas. Those are going to be the ones that potentially there's an experience you can sell, not just a product. Lesson number 9, humans love collectibles. Why did Zippo become such an iconic name? Well, again, it largely has to do with the fact that in 1958, they put date stamps onto every single lighter case that they sold. And they inadvertently, accidentally made their product collectibles. This ties into something deep in human DNA. Human beings love collectibles. Fungible objects like Bitcoin and Bic lighters aren't super exciting because every Bitcoin is worth exactly as much as every other Bitcoin. Every disposable Bic plastic lighter is worth every bit as much as every other disposable Bic plastic lighter. But non-fungible assets, things like CryptoKitties or Zippo lighters, where one might be worth a lot more than the other, are things that get people excited. One Zippo lighter, like this plain one here, may not be worth very much. But my ultra rare, super limited edition Samson Williams Human Suck Zippo lighter, special edition 1 of 1, this is worth its weight in gold. Because nobody else on the planet, not even Mr. Samson Williams himself, has another lighter just like this one. This is encoded into our DNA. When human beings see something unique and special, and they think to themselves, ooh, I could have one of those, that becomes almost irresistible. Did anybody look at the picture of this adorable baby here on my slide and not feel their heart melt just a little bit? Right? We look at that very special, adorable creature, and this stirs something very primal in us. And we think, ooh, I could have something like that of my very own. This is what keeps the human population ever growing and ever expanding. This desire for collectibles or non-fungible items is programmed deep into our DNA. and goes back hundreds of millions of years. You might want to leverage that in your blockchain solution. In other words, if you're thinking about what the future looks like, the future looks a lot more like ERC 721s or non-fungible tokens than it does ERC 20s or fungible tokens. Right? The future of tokenization and blockchain likely has a lot more to do with collectibles than it does with currencies. That doesn't mean there aren't any new or major or exciting developments that are going to come along in the general cryptocurrency space. It just means that what's happening with collectibles and NFTs speaks to something much deeper, much more primal, and much more powerful inside of our genetic code. And finally, lesson number 10, the last lesson we can take from this story about Zippo. Just remember, whether you're successful or not, it all comes down to luck, or it mostly comes down to luck. I think if you listen to the story of any successful person talk about how they got to be in the position they're in, just about every successful person will say, in addition to working hard, I also just happen to be in the right place at the right time. And here's the thing about luck. You cannot control if or when luck ever shows up. But what you can do is you can make sure that when luck shows up, you're ready and you can capitalize on it. And the whole reason Zippo became a name that we all know and recognize and view as iconic almost 100 years after its design is because of one incident. Because the United States Army at the beginning of World War II decided that every GI should be issued their own personal Zippo lighter. If the US Army had decided to select another brand, nobody would know the name Zippo. Their history would have been very short-lived, and they would have been forgotten by just about everybody alive today, almost 100 years later. But this piece of good luck, this piece that was far outside of their control, the United States Army selecting their product to be issued to every single GI at the beginning of World War II, made them an American cultural icon. That was a tremendous piece of luck. And that luck was completely and totally outside of Zippo's control. But what was inside Zippo's control was making sure when they got lucky, they were in a position to capitalize on it, to take a good design and to make that good luck result in great success. You see, Zippo could have had the same luck. The US Army could have selected them to be the pocket lighter of choice for every GI going into World War II. But what if they made a terrible product and they had no organizational culture that bound them together and aligned them on a greater vision? What if quality wasn't such a central focus of what they were doing? Every American GI would have gone off to war and realized that Zippo lighters were pretty terrible, and they never would have thought about them again. So it's not just that luck comes knocking at your door. Make sure when luck comes knocking at your door, you're there and you're listening and you're ready to answer. You can't control luck, but you can definitely be prepared for it if and when it arrives. And so keep this in mind. If you go out and you do great things in the world of blockchain or technology, be humble. Don't let your ego get too big. Don't try and take credit for the things you don't deserve credit for. If you're successful, your success likely has more to do with luck than you think. And if you fail, if you go out and you fall on your face and you learn a lot of lessons the hard way, don't be too hard on yourself. Don't beat yourself up. Don't be scared of giving it another go around. Your success or your failure is more out of your hand than you might think. For example, the overwhelming number of players in the National Hockey League, in the NHL, have January birthdays. Is that because people born in January are naturally predisposed to be better at hockey? No, it's not. It's because just about every junior hockey league the world over has a cutoff date of January 1st for birthdays. That means that the kids that were born in January and February are going to be slightly bigger and stronger than the kids who are playing on the same team but were born in November and December. The kids who are stronger and faster and have greater physical ability because they're slightly older and more mature are going to get more attention from coaches. They're going to get more playing time. Their skills are going to be developed at a faster rate than their peers. And the net result of this is if you look at most of the professional hockey players in the NFL, the NHL, excuse me, the overwhelming majority of them have birthdays in January or February or the early part of the year. This has everything to do with luck and nothing to do with hard work or dedication, right? Or not primarily. Now, those players who were born in January still had to work hard and dedicate themselves to building their skills to make it to the professional level. But when they look back on it, it's hard for them to say the reason I made it to the NHL, the reason I became a professional is 100% based on my natural ability and has nothing to do with luck. In truth, more of it probably has to do with luck than natural ability. So just remember this. If you're successful, be humble. If you fail, don't be too hard on yourself and don't be afraid to try again. A lot of this may be much more out of your control than you want to believe. And so I hope this has been helpful. 10 different lessons that we can extract from what is almost a 100-year-old design. So don't forget, as you're approaching the world of blockchain, as you're looking at all this amazing new technology, don't forget these important lessons. Lessons like your old tools are never going to die. They're never going to go away. You're going to be rewarded for being clever, not smart. And this can be misleading because if you're successful, you're going to be remembered for being smart, not clever. You want to sell the steak, not the sizzle. You want to sell the experience, not just the product. Remember, culture is no accident. Good culture is always cultured. Remember, when we're talking about culture and these largely intangible things, that's what your customers are really buying. It's the emotional, not the rational connection to your product or your brand or your company that causes consumers to open up their wallet and spend their hard-earned money. Remember that if you focus on the customer experience and make that your unwavering mission to continually improve the customer experience, you're going to find that good things have a way of just inadvertently happening along the way. Right? Some of the most fortunate events that will happen to you are events that are largely going to come up as byproducts of other things that you're focusing on. Remember that even though this technology is new and it represents a radically different approach and a big radical rethink from our conventional approaches, this doesn't mean we need to go out and reinvent the world around us. Remember that humans love rare, collectible, unique items. It's encoded in a very deep level in our DNA. And remember, at the end of the day, a lot of this is just luck and it's out of your control. And the only thing you can do is make sure when luck or opportunity comes knocking on the door, you're there with your dress shoes on, ready to go. So I hope this has been successful. If this type of information has been successful, let me know in the comments. If this type of information hasn't been successful, if you think all of this is wildly unhelpful or you disagree, leave a message in the comments. I'd love to know what you guys think. And I'd also love to know, do you guys see any other parallels between old products or old approaches? Maybe things that aren't on our radars. We're talking about high tech emerging approaches like blockchain and AI and IoT and big data and augmented reality. Are there lessons from the past that we could leverage that maybe we've forgotten about? If so, I'd love to hear about that too. Anyway, I thank you guys for joining me. If you like the information here, be sure to subscribe. Look for new videos every week as we talk about what's happening in the blockchain world. And until next time, I'm Chris Bennett, your blockchain beard guy. Take care, guys.